You ever walk into a room and feel the air change? Not because of anything you did, but because of what you are. That was my welcome to the Weston Police Department. The front lobby had that small-town station smell, old coffee, gun oil, and dust that nobody bothered to wipe off the counter. A receptionist sat behind thick glass, chewing gum like she had nowhere better to be. Nobody looked up. Nobody asked what I needed. I stood there for a few seconds, watching officers walk past without so much as a nod. Then a door swung open, and in stepped a cop, white, mid-30s, built like a high school linebacker who never quite let go of the glory days. His uniform fit snug over his broad chest, and the name on his badge read, Sergeant Jensen. Jensen looked at me the way you might look at someone dragging mud across your clean floor. His lips curled into something close to a smirk, and then he spoke, loud enough for the others in the room to hear. You lost, buddy. Courthouse is 2 blocks down. Welfare office is on Main if that's what you're looking for. I let that sit for a moment. I was dressed simple, jeans, a plain button-up, and work boots. Nothing flashy, nothing fancy. But that wasn't what he saw. He saw a black man standing in his precinct, and that was enough for him to make assumptions. I exhaled slowly, keeping my face calm. Let's see how deep this rot goes. Actually, I said, scratching my chin, I was hoping to speak to whoever's in charge around here. Jensen snorted. That'd be me right now. Sergeant Jensen. And I don't really have time for Sergeant, huh? I cut in, letting my voice drop just enough to get his attention. So, you're the one setting the example for the rest of the department? Something in my tone must have set off an alarm in his head because his smirk faded just a little. The officers near the front desk had started paying attention, sensing something off but not quite sure what. You got a complaint, you can take it up with. No complaint, I said, shaking my head. Just an observation. Jensen looked me over again, but this time there was hesitation in his eyes. He was trying to figure me out, but he had already shown his hand. A door opened down the hall, and a voice called out, "Briefing in 5, everyone in the room." Jensen exhaled through his nose, then pointed a finger at me. "Don't go anywhere." I smiled. Wouldn't dream of it. And just like that, he turned on his heel and walked off. I followed, keeping a slow, steady pace as the officers moved into the briefing room. The tension in my shoulders stayed where it was, settled in like an old companion. I had spent 2 decades in law enforcement. I'd seen corruption. I'd seen arrogance. But seeing it right here, in my own department, that was different. And they had no idea what was coming next. The briefing room was just big enough to hold the department's morning shift, maybe 20 officers, give or take. Rows of metal chairs faced a podium at the front, where a corkboard displayed a few pinned-up bulletins and a faded code of ethics poster. Not that anybody seemed to take that last part seriously. Jensen took a seat near the front, leaning back with his arms crossed, like he owned the place. A few officers chatted in low voices, others scrolled their phones. Nobody looked particularly alert. Nobody looked like they expected much. They were about to learn something real quick. The door opened again, and a short, balding lieutenant stepped in, clearing his throat. The room quieted just enough. "All right, listen up. We got a special announcement today," he said. "New leadership, so everybody sit up and pay attention." That got their interest. I could see the shifts in posture, the flickers of curiosity. Some of them had probably heard whispers. Others just assumed it'd be another good OL boy from some other county. Then the lieutenant stepped aside. "Chief Lewis, floor's yours." I walked up to the podium. Silence. I took my time looking around the room, meeting eyes where I could. The faces staring back at me ranged from confusion to mild shock. A few jaws tightened. A few glances were exchanged. And then, right on cue, Jensen leaned forward in his chair. "What kind of joke is this?" Nobody laughed. I let the silence stretch. Let them sit in it. "No joke," I said finally, my voice even, steady. "Name's Aaron Lewis. As of this morning, I'm your new chief of police." A few officers shifted in their seats. A couple of them, older guys in the back, just sat there, arms folded, watching. They weren't surprised. They had been around long enough to see the tide turning, and they were just waiting to see where it landed. Jensen, though, he was still processing. "No way," he muttered, shaking his head. "No damn way." I folded my hands on the podium and gave him a look. "Something wrong, Sergeant." He blinked at me, and I saw it, the realization. The moment his own words from earlier came back to him, like a bad meal creeping up. He started to speak, then stopped. I didn't break eye contact. Didn't let him off the hook. "See, here's the thing," I continued. "I've been in law enforcement for over 20 years. Worked narcotics in Chicago, ran homicide in St. Louis, and spent the last 5 years turning around a precinct that had more problems than you could count. And now I'm here. Watching. Listening. Learning." I let my gaze sweep over them again. Some of them were still stiff, unsure of what to do with themselves. Others kept their eyes down. And Jensen, he had gone completely still. "Before I even stepped into this room," I said, "I got a first-hand look at how this department operates. And let me tell you what I saw." I shook my head. It wasn't good. Now the tension in the room was thick enough to cut. "Change is coming," I said, voice firm. "And it starts today." No one spoke. No one dared. And for the first time since I walked into that station, I could feel it. Fear. They knew. Their time was up. You ever seen a room full of people try to stay still, even when they feel the walls closing in? That's what I saw in front of me. Officers sitting up straighter, some suddenly more interested in their notepads, a few shifting in their seats like they wanted to disappear into the floor. Except for one. Jensen. He still had that tight-jawed look, but I saw the calculation in his eyes now. He was working through the situation, realizing just how bad he'd screwed up, but also searching for a way to save face. "Chief," he said finally, forcing something close to a smile. "Guess we got off on the wrong foot." I raised an eyebrow. "That's so." He cleared his throat, sat up a little straighter. "Didn't realize who I was talking to. Just a misunderstanding." I let the words settle, then exhaled. "A misunderstanding?" "Yeah." He nodded, glancing around the room like he expected backup. He wasn't getting any. "I mean, you showed up out of nowhere, dressed like..." He caught himself before he finished that sentence. "Smart." "Like what?" I asked, my voice smooth, even. Silence. Jensen looked away. "Thought so." I stepped around the podium, taking slow, deliberate steps toward the front row. I saw the flickers of discomfort on a few faces, the way some of them averted their eyes when I passed. I knew what they were thinking. How much did he hear? How much does he know? Good. "See, I could have walked in here this morning with a whole speech," I said, hands in my pockets. "Could have come in, told you all about my experience, my leadership style, all that. But that wouldn't have told me a damn thing about you." I stopped next to Jensen's chair. "So, I came in as just another man off the street. Just an ordinary citizen. The kind of person who walks through your front doors every single day." I looked right at him. And what did I get? He swallowed but didn't answer. Disrespect. Assumptions. A cop who thought it was perfectly fine to humiliate a man just because he could. The room felt like a pressure cooker now. "Now, if that's how I got treated as an outsider," I said, my voice dropping just a little, "I can only imagine how this department treats people when no one's watching." I turned, taking in the entire room. "But I am watching now. And let me make something very clear." I glanced toward the old, faded code of ethics poster on the wall, then back at them. "The way things have been, the way some of you have been allowed to operate, that's over." I let the words hang, heavy and certain. I saw a couple of the younger officers straighten up, their expressions shifting. A few of them looked relieved, like they'd been waiting for someone to say it out loud. But others, the older ones, the ones who had been here too long without ever being questioned, they sat stiff, their silence thick with defiance. Jensen, though, he was quiet now. Smartest thing he'd done all morning. "We're gonna do this right," I continued. "We're gonna be better. And if any of you have a problem with that," I shrugged. "Well, there's the door." The silence that followed was absolute. No one moved. No one spoke. They weren't ready to admit it yet, but I knew, Some of them were already wondering how much longer they could stay before the ground beneath them completely crumbled. And I was just getting started. The silence in the room was thick, pressing in from all sides. I let it stretch, let them sit with it. I wanted them to feel the weight of what I just said, no distractions, no way to brush it off. Because that's what people like Jensen and his kind always counted on. Time. Time to smooth things over, to laugh off bad behavior, to make excuses. Not this time. Now, I said finally, stepping back toward the podium, we've got work to do. This department has a reputation. And from what I've already seen, it's not the kind we should be proud of. Nobody argued. So, let me lay it out plain. Starting today, every single one of you will be held to the standards this badge is supposed to represent. I tapped the emblem on my belt. That means respect. That means accountability. And that sure as hell means consequences when you step out of line. I caught a flicker of movement near the back. Officer Greg Davis, late 40s, salt and pepper hair, arms crossed so tight his knuckles went white. One of the department's veterans. He had the look of a man who wasn't happy about what he was hearing. "Something on your mind, Davis?" I asked. He shifted, glanced around the room. When he finally spoke, his voice was slow, measured. "With all due respect, Chief, we've been doing this job a long time. We know how to handle things around here." "That's so." I leaned against the podium. "Tell me, how exactly have you been handling things?" A muscle in his jaw ticked. "We get the job done. By cutting corners. By treating people like problems instead of citizens." I let my gaze sweep across the room. By assuming a man in work boots has no business walking through the front door unless he's in handcuffs? No one spoke. Davis exhaled through his nose, looking like he wanted to say more. But he didn't. He just sat back, crossing his arms even tighter. "You're right about one thing," I continued. "This department has been doing things a certain way for a long time. And that's exactly why we're in the mess we're in now." I scanned the room, picking up on the subtle shifts, the younger officers sitting a little straighter, some of the veterans looking away, a few of them sizing me up like they were waiting to see if I was all talk. "Look, I know change isn't easy," I said, my voice leveling out. "And I'm not asking you to like me. I'm not asking you to be my friend. What I am asking, no, what I expect, is for every one of you to remember why you put on that uniform in the first place." I saw a flicker of something in a few faces. Shame, maybe. Or recognition. Like they'd forgotten for a while and didn't want to admit it. But if you're the kind of cop who thinks this badge gives you a free pass to do whatever the hell you want, I let that hang for a second. You won't last long under me. That's a promise. I looked back at Davis. That clear? His jaw was tight, but he nodded. Crystal. Jensen, for once, kept his damn mouth shut. "Good," I said, straightening up. "Briefing's over. Get to work." Chairs scraped against the floor as officers stood, some moving quicker than others. The tension in the room didn't ease, it just stretched out, thinner, heavier. I saw some of them whispering on their way out, others throwing glances my way when they thought I wasn't looking. Jensen lingered. I didn't acknowledge him. Not yet. I just watched as he turned and walked out, his shoulders squared, his steps just a little too stiff. He knew what was coming. They all did. And this was just the beginning. By the time I stepped into my office now, the whispers had already started. The station had that old government building feel to it. Beige walls, outdated furniture, a faint smell of burnt coffee clinging to the air. I shut the door behind me, letting out a slow breath. The briefing had gone exactly as I expected. Fear. Resistance. Defiance. Good. That meant they understood what was at stake. I sat down at my desk, opening one of the department files I'd requested before I arrived. I had spent the last few months digging into Weston PD's history, and what I found didn't surprise me. Excessive force complaints, most dismissed without review. Misconduct reports, buried under mountains of paperwork. Traffic stops skewed heavily toward Black and Latino residents, despite the town being nearly 80% white. It wasn't just a few bad apples. The whole damn orchard was rotten. A knock at the door. "Come in." The door swung open, and Detective Karen Whitaker stepped inside. Mid-30s, blonde hair tied back, sharp eyes that didn't miss much. I had read her file. Clean record. Consistently high performance reviews. No major complaints. She shut the door behind her, hands in her pockets. "Hell of a first impression," she said, tilting her head. "Had to set the tone," I replied, leaning back in my chair. "Something tells me not everyone appreciated it." "Oh, you could say that." She let out a small chuckle, but there was no humor in it. "Jensen's pissed. Davis, too. But you probably knew that already." I did. She hesitated for a second. "You sure you want to take this on? This place? It's not gonna change overnight." I studied her. There was something in her voice. Not doubt, exactly. More like caution. Like she'd been here long enough to know how deep the rot went. "I didn't take this job to play it safe," I said. "And if you're in this for the right reasons, neither did you." She nodded slowly. "Fair enough. So, tell me, Detective." I rested my arms on the desk. "Who can I trust in this department?" She exhaled, rubbing the back of her neck. "There are good ones here, Chief. Young guys, some of the newer hires. They want to do the job the right way, but—" She hesitated. "They know what happens if they step out of line. The old guard. They've had control for years. And people like Jensen." She shook her head. "They don't go down without a fight." "I'm counting on that," I said. She gave me a long look. "You planning something?" "Not yet." I closed the file in front of me. "But I need to see what I'm working with first. Who's loyal to the job, and who's loyal to themselves." She nodded again, then shifted toward the door. "Well, if you ever need a set of eyes on the inside, let me know." I watched her go. Maybe she was one of the good ones. Maybe not. Time would tell. But one thing was certain. I had just kicked the hornet's nest. And it was only a matter of time before the stingers came out. The usual noise, the idle chatter, the ringing phones, the rustling of papers, was muted, almost non-existent, as though the entire department held its breath waiting for something to break. I wasn't disappointed when the door creaked open. It was Jensen, standing there in the doorway with that familiar, tight-lipped expression on his face. He didn't walk in immediately. He lingered for a moment, his fingers gripping the doorframe like he was testing whether or not he should actually cross the threshold. "Close the door," I said, not looking up. There was no need for pleasantries. I already knew why he was here. He did as I told him, the click of the door punctuating the tense quiet that hung between us. Then, for a few long seconds, he just stood there, his hands folded at his waist. I finally looked up. His jaw was tight, his posture straight, almost rigid. He wasn't here for a casual conversation. He wasn't here to make excuses, not yet. This was different. He had something to say, but he wasn't about to just hand it over. That was clear. I didn't make him start. I simply leaned back in my chair and waited, not rushing him. This was his moment to take control of the situation, to show me what he was made of. Jensen let out a breath. "I'll be straight with you, Chief," he said, his voice a little rougher than usual, like he was working hard to control his words. "I came in here expecting one thing. Thought I could push you around like I've done with everyone else. And now?" I asked, not bothering to make it a question. I already knew the answer. But I wanted to hear it from him. Now I see that was a mistake. His eyes didn't leave mine, and for the first time since I stepped into this department, there was something raw in his gaze. Something close to respect, though it hadn't fully settled yet. "I thought you were just another one of those new blood chiefs, you know? The kind who comes in, talks big, but doesn't last long. Thought I could rattle you. But now I'm not so sure." His words hung in the air, and I leaned forward, giving him the floor. "You don't have to be sure. You already made your move." He didn't flinch, though the tension in his jaw tightened further. "Yeah, I know. And I'll be honest with you, Chief. I didn't respect you when you first showed up. Didn't even think you were the right person for the job. I'm used to people like you coming and going, the ones who think they can change everything by yelling and making demands. But you're different. You've got something I didn't see at first. And now I'm here to say it, Whatever you're gonna do, I'm in. But I need to be sure it's worth it. I folded my arms on the desk, studying him. This wasn't a cop trying to save face or apologize weakly. Jensen was offering something more, a challenge. He wasn't giving me an inch, but he wasn't backing down either. This was an ultimatum, disguised as a conversation. "Why now?" I asked. "Why come to me now?" Jensen's gaze sharpened, and for the first time, I saw the man beneath the badge. "Because I know what this department is, Chief. I know what it's capable of, and I know what it's become. And it's a mess. But not everyone is here to make it worse. Some of us still want to do this job the right way. But we can't do it alone. Not with the old guard breathing down our necks. Not with people like Davis and the others thinking they can run things behind closed doors." I felt a flicker of something shift inside me. This wasn't about him making excuses anymore. Jensen was giving me a glimpse of the man who had been here all along, buried under years of frustration and burnout. I could see it now. He was tired of the old game. But he wasn't ready to drop everything just because I showed up with a new vision. "So you want to change?" I asked, testing him. "You want to do this the right way? Fine. But it's not going to be easy. You think I'm going to just hand you a free pass because you're suddenly on board? You're wrong." He didn't flinch, didn't break. "I never asked for a free pass. But I need to know you're serious about this. About changing this place. Because if you're not, then we're just wasting time." The sharpness in his voice told me everything I needed to know. He wasn't asking for redemption. He wasn't even asking for forgiveness. He was telling me that if I wasn't going to be serious about cleaning this department up, he wouldn't waste another minute here. "I'm serious," I said, meeting his gaze. "But it's not just about making promises or giving speeches. You've been here long enough to know that. And you've been a part of the problem for a long time. So here's the deal. You're either with me or you're in the way." He didn't blink. "I'm not in the way. But I'm not going to follow anyone who's just blowing smoke." "I'm not asking you to follow," I shot back. "I'm asking you to do what you're supposed to do. Lead. Be better. Because if you're not, if you're still stuck in this place where people like you think they can walk all over the rest of us, you're going to find out just how quickly this department can turn on you." Jensen shifted his stance, his eyes narrowing, but there was no defiance. "Not anymore. I know where I stand, Chief. I'm not asking for your approval. I'm telling you where I stand. I'm ready to back you up. But don't think for a second I'm going to stand behind someone who's not as committed as I am." We were on the same page now. It wasn't just about respect. It was about proving that we weren't going to let the department fall apart, piece by piece, because no one had the guts to stand up to the old guard. "I don't care about your loyalty to me," I said. "I care about your loyalty to this badge, to this job, and to the people you're supposed to protect. If that's what you're about, then we can work together. But if you're still in this for the power trip, you've got no place here." There was a long silence between us. Jensen's face was unreadable now, and for the first time since we'd started this conversation, I wasn't sure where he stood. But I could see the gears turning in his mind, calculating, weighing his options. Finally, he spoke, his voice steady, even if there was an edge to it. "I'll play by your rules, Chief. But make no mistake, if you don't follow through on your end of this, I'll walk away. And I won't be the only one." I nodded slowly, recognizing the challenge in his voice. He wasn't going to just follow me. He wasn't here to be a pawn. But I wasn't asking for a pawn. I was asking for someone who could stand with me in the fight ahead, someone who understood what was on the line. "Deal," I said. Jensen stood there for a moment longer, as if weighing the finality of our exchange. Then, without another word, he turned and walked out of my office. But this time, I knew something had shifted. We weren't allies yet. But we were no longer enemies. This wasn't over. But it was a start. And that was enough. If this story resonated with you, share it with those who need to hear it. Let's start conversations that matter, and that will lead to change. Subscribe to our channel for more stories like this that challenge us, inspire us, and remind us of what we are capable of when we stand up for what is right.